Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you are doing well. You're back and ready for more 115. We're going to continue talking about Ajax. In particular, we're going to be looking at taking the sort of chat app that we had from the last live Q&A and really expanding it out. I talk about this a fair bit in the lecture slides. So if you have questions, that is one place to look at. Part of what I'm hoping to do with these is really be able to answer your questions, try to show you examples, how things go about, common gotchas that can occur. So please, if you have questions, any questions you might have about Ajax, about this chat app, about any of this sort of work, make sure you ask. A second thing, just to make sure everybody's everybody's on the same page. One of the questions, and I think I've asked this now 2 or 3 times as an attendance question or top hat question or both, is about what computers are running things. One thing to remember for all of this Ajax and why we need all of this Ajax is that we have 2 different computers here. And I'm going to try to make it clear in the display, right? Right now, what you're seeing on this screen is all of the code that runs on REPL, and that's going to be the Python code. What you see over here, this web page, this is all the code that runs on my computer, and potentially actually more than just my computer. If you look at the top here, some of you may be able to read the URL. This is when this chat app works. At the moment, I have a couple of errors in there just to show you how this happens, how you can fix it. But when this chat app works, in fact, everybody here will be able to participate, and we could all use this to chat. So the first thing you can see is right now it's not working. There are a couple of errors here. If I go into the web console, so the first thing it says is that chat.js was loaded, even though its MIME type is not a valid JavaScript one, which is kind of odd. And then the second thing is it says it failed to load ajax.js. So again, like last time, I'm splitting out my JavaScript into 2 files. I have the chat.js, which has all of my chat code. I'll show that in a second. And then the Ajax.js, which just has that Ajax GET request and Ajax POST request, because that's what I wanted to do. So for the chat.js, you can see I've got something here that responds on that route. And in fact, if you look over here on the right-hand side, you can see that there are requests. So when we start up, we get a request just for that /, that's that index.html file. And it returns a 200 code. That means it was successful. And then the size of the data that got returned. So for chat, you can see that where I look up the get chat, I can see there's a code of 200. It was successful, but the size is 0. And that's kind of a problem. And if I look over here, you can see I have something with a route chat.js, def chat file. I read in that static file, and I forgot, well, you can pretend for these purposes, I forgot to return it. One thing to remember with all of these bottle functions, with all of this Ajax, it does require information to go back and forth. So I can uncomment out that return statement. If I restart this now, let it go. You can see now that chat.js still has a code of 200, but note that its size is much larger. And if I come over here, I can see that it's now at least running it, but it's still giving me an error. So let me actually just open up. There should be a way. I'm not sure if it'll let me do this. Now, and we can see the chat code in there if I wanted. I'm not going to worry about it right now. So for the Ajax, you can see I have here code for this to load in the Ajax file. I've got Ajax file. I read in the static file. I return it. And, if I look over here, I can see that there is a request for Ajax. So that tells me I'm actually looking for that information. That's useful. But you can see that return code is 404. That means that there's an error. And a 404 is a not found. That means I don't have a function that is going to handle that request. And if we look, you can see that's because I forgot, or for these purposes, I forgot the @bottle.route. So if you have an error, the first thing to do is check that you have that function with the annotation, the bottle route annotation, and that you've got everything going. So now I can actually restart this. Again, need to restart everything. And you can see there's some messages whenever a request comes in, I'm going to respond with all the messages. And if I reload my page, you can see that there's all sorts of test messages I had at the beginning that will allow us to see what's going on. And now this is interesting, kind of. And so if we look at the web page itself, you can see that it starts by calling load chat. And so what load chat is going to do is just call that get request /chat. And what will happen is it's going to get back a response. And note that what the browser receives is this string, right? And this is going to be a string. We can print out those results. If we look at the chat.js file, right? What's going to happen is when we get that response back from the server, because the Ajax GET request, and I know that there was a couple people emailing me saying they're a little confused about this, and I wish I had a really good analogy. I don't, unfortunately. So I can't offer you a great analogy for how this works. You just have to remember that we're working between two different computers. And I'm actually going to demonstrate this in a little bit. So when we send out that Ajax GET request, that's sort of us asking, hey, can you send me this data? I'm going to send it to /chat. And then what we tell JavaScript is whenever we get that response, it might be instantaneous. It doesn't have to be. Call render chat. And there's no deeper meanings here or anything else. All a GET request is doing every time, what we're going to do is we're just going to use it to say, hey, send me this data, and we'll get that chat back and say, here's what to execute when we get that response. So in render chat, you can see that what I do is I originally print out that JSON data. That's this string right here. So you can see it's a nice little string. Sort of tells us what's going on. Do a little bit of stuff. I get my chat element. Then what I do is I use json.parse. Remember json.parse, all caps for the JSON. That is the HTML or the JavaScript function that takes a JSON blob, a JSON string, two names for the same thing, and converts it into usable data in JavaScript. So rather than being a string, all of a sudden, what I get is an actual list. And inside this list, what do I have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects, right? And you can see here, this is defining one object. This is defining a second one, a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one for each message. The reason that it's, displaying out what looks like an object here, what we know is how we define an object in JavaScript here, whereas here it just says object, is, remember, this is a string. These are all just text characters. It doesn't mean anything to JavaScript. It's no different than if we had, my name is Matthew or I am fine or anything else. At this point, now JavaScript recognizes those as objects, and we're going to have to use them as objects, which is good because that's actually going to make it a lot easier to get those values, right? If you look, we have the value hello, which we want, the value how are you, which we want. I'm just sending things back as an object. The key is going to be message. The value will be whatever the value of that message is. So Going from there, what do? We just go through each thing. We're going to update this chat string, add that message, add a new line, and then at the end, we want to update our div. A div is not an input element, so we have to use .innerHTML, and we assign it to the results of our chat. And what we can do is if I type in another message, then what's going to happen is it's going to send that message out, and it's going to get a response. And you can see it doesn't always come back immediately, right? Remember, these are two different computers working here. But as soon as it gets a response, as soon as it heard back, it sent that updated list of messages. And in fact, if I wanted, I can create a second tab, and I can have a conversation with myself. So I can send that over. Send in something, and you can see it's not updating it. Over here on the second tab, it's now updated it after a little while. There's a little bit of a delay there. Talk about why in a little bit. But over here, we haven't seen that updated message. So this is kind of a crappy ass chat program, to be perfectly honest, right? It's not doing that. But if I send this message and wait a little bit, it's almost as if the server's taking a while. You can see it's going to come back. And not only do I get, this is the first tab, I also get the message that the other person sent. Both of these tabs, which happen to be both on my computer, are working with the same server. And in fact, if you guys wanted, any of you out there, you could use the same URL and you could type in your own messages and continue this chat. So for send message, you'll see that send message, whenever I send a message, we have the data that we want to send, which is going to be an object. And we're going to convert that to note that we're going to have this JSON blob, which is a string. So we're going to take that object, turn it into a string, right? Send message. We get that text box. Now, if we want to read from the text box, we have to use .value. The value is the key. So we'll get whatever its contents were, assign its contents to the empty string just to make it nicer, make it clearer, make it so that you guys don't have to see my messages, since apparently that's coming through right now. We then create that object that we want to send. So we're going to use the key of message. The value is whatever text we happen to want. That's what was printed out there, right? Was that object. Then now that object that's useful in JavaScript, it's not so useful in anything else. So in order to send it, we have to turn it into a JSON blob. And for that, in JavaScript, we use json.stringify. And when we do that, we call, we're going to pass in what we want to send. That's that object. And you can see that the blob that actually gets sent, that turns it into a JSON blob, which is a type of string. We can read it now, much better for us human beings. Not as good for the computer, though. So that's what gets sent, and that's where we use this AJAX post request. AJAX post request is just a way of saying, sending data over to the server. We're going to send it to this URL /send. This is the data that we're actually going to send, JSON blob. And we say, look, every time we make any of these AJAX requests, we always get a response back. So we say, when we get a response back, make it render call that render chat function again. So I don't always have to use the same function for every response. I am here because it's convenient. But now the thing is, in doing this, like I said, it does make life a little bit easier as far as that goes. But you'll notice that there's a delay. It's not an immediate response, right? And this is one of the reasons why we need to just give it the name of the function here rather than calling the functions ourselves. Remember, this is running between two separate computers, my computer and Replit's computer. And so we don't know when that response is going to come back. We can't call that function directly because until we receive a response, we have nothing to do. And again, this is part of the point of Ajax. We want to be able to update this page as things occur, but we don't know when those updates are going to happen. So I actually could make a change, and I actually am going to make a change real quick. In the HTML file, I actually right now just have it calling load chat at the very beginning. But one thing I could do is, if you remember, we had that set interval function, and that just says, let's call this function, and it tells it how often. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm telling it, let's call the function load chat every, let's say, we're going to call that function load chat once a second. So now, I think that's how this works. And so you can see now it's going to be updating more often, once a second, because I told it to. Sure, yeah. So this will help keep it, more updated. We don't have to wait all the time for things to occur. It's not updating for reasons I don't know. Interesting thing, you can actually. So, this is going to work pretty well. So the question is, well, what are we doing on the server side, right? So far, we've looked at everything on the client side. So we can start with main.py. That's sort of the basic thing. And so we talked about this, the slash, the chat.js, Ajax.js responses, right? Those are the things that are handling the response. We can also see what we're going to do every time there's a request for the chat window. And what this says to do, we're going to respond with, this is my function, respond with chat. We're going to call getChat. And for simplicity, for convenience, and also because it's a lot cleaner, what I'm doing right now is I've split up my functions into two. In main.js, I have all of the code I need for the web server. In main.js, main.py, I have all of the code for the web server. In chat.py, I'm going to have all of the code I need to handle the chat functions. And by doing this, it just makes my code cleaner and easier to use. Because if I have an issue with my chat, I know where to go. If I have an issue with the web server, I know where to go. And actually, this is something you're going to have to do in your project for part 4. Now, you'll note that in order to be able to use that second Python file, that chat.py file, I had to do two things. The first one is I have up here import chat. So since the name is chat.py, I just have to write chat here, and I add that import. So far, before this, we've used it basically for Python libraries, but we can also use it for our own libraries, any code that we want. And then when I want to call that function, I have to say chat, since that's the module it's in, that's the name of the file, and then whatever function. So getChat is going to get the results of that chat. It'll get all of those messages. And if you look here, I'm outputting what I get. So it's going to get a list, and you can see here's the list it gets, all those different messages. And then what we're going to do now to send the data over, the list is useful in Python, not so useful to anything else. So in order to be able to send it to other computers, we need to convert it into a JSON blob. So we call json.dumps, pass in that list. And then if I send, print out what's responding with, note that it's now a str, it's now a string, just text. And in fact, it's this text right here. Here is the string. So quote, and then it's got the bracket, and then a brace for each of the messages. And so we can go back and forth. So this is going to be able to print everything out. Now, when I send a message, if we look, we can see that we sent out another message, even if we haven't gotten that response back. And what happened was it's going to come into here. We're going to post it to /send. There it goes. It receives, right? We're going to use that bottle.request.body.read.decode, right? That takes in whatever was in that post, whatever data got sent. And you can see that what we received was a string. And note again, it's got quotes and then messages in quotes because that's a string, another message sent. So it receives a string. That's what that JSON blob is. But that's really a dictionary. We want to be able to use it as a dictionary. So what we do is we call JSON.loads. That's what JSON.loads is the Python function we use when we receive a JSON blob, but we want to use it as whatever the original data type is. We want to use it in Python, in real data. And so after we do that, you can see what we get is a dictionary. That converts it into the dictionary. And if we look at this dictionary, because I print that out, you can see its key is the string message. Its value is another message sent. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that message, just add that string, another message sent, to our chat list. And then you can see I sort of cheated for this. Normally, we don't need to wait around for anything, right? Normally, we would just run our code directly. In order to point out that that response doesn't have to be received immediately, I added this command right here that just adds a 5-second delay. There's no reason why anybody would ever do this unless they are a professor teaching a class and trying to make clear to everybody that there are two different computers working and why we need to use this AJAX. We don't necessarily know when that response is going to come back. It could be that there's a delay. Here I added a pause, but it could be if everybody in the class were responding at once, if I had to deal with 100 users, if I have to create a whole VM, boot up that whole VM, run the code that you type in to the window, and then see the response, which is what UB Infinite does, right? That can take a little bit of time. It actually does create a whole virtual machine. So it runs it inside this virtual machine. That way, if you have any code that breaks, it doesn't break the server. But so that's where this AJAX comes in. You can see then what I'm going to do is call respond with chat. That's up here, right? These are just basic Python functions. The annotations allow us to use them with a bottle server. But we can use them just like we can do anything that we want in Python. So we can call them from each other. We can have them call other functions, whatever we want. And since that already responds with a full chat log, that's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is actually, I think that the set interval is not supposed to have the function call. So let me just do this. Yeah. So now if you look, what's going to happen is when I send a message, you'll note that it takes a little bit because it's going to take a little bit to respond and I haven't reloaded the page. Let me reload this page. If I now send a message, send a message from over here, reload this page too. Now, I still have that 5-second delay in, but what's going to happen is it should update without me having to actually type anything in. I haven't sent any messages or anything else. It's just automatically updating every second. And again, this is part of the benefit of AJAX. Note, I can use this program as often as I want. The fact that it's doing all of this work, totally immaterial. You can see over here, we're getting lots of requests coming in. We're constantly making that request once a second for the chat, but it doesn't delay my computer. My computer is running perfectly well. There's no problem. So just to show you how the chat part works, this is actually relatively straightforward. For that add message, what I'm doing is I'm just keeping a log file. Literally, I just have a text file. Each message is in its own line. So when a message comes in, I just open the log file. Note I have to use that append mode, that A, that keeps any contents, adds to the end, and I just write out the message. That's pretty simple. Okay, this is getting really, really dizzying to look at. Then to get the messages, I create my list, right? We're using the accumulator pattern here. Here's my accumulator, full chat. If it makes people eat a little bit happier, I can just change this to use my traditional name, retval. Right, so I've got my accumulator. I open the log file, go through line by line. For each line, what am I going to do? I'm going to make my dictionary. The key is going to be message, and the value is going to be whatever the text is on that line. And I use rstrip there. I remove that new line just because I don't need it. Actually, HTML doesn't use it at all. There's no reason to. And then I add that to my accumulator. And once I've gone through the entire file, I return it. And the server then will take care of converting that into JSON and running for me. And so as a result, we are able to send messages back and forth. So I can send a message, and you can see, even though I sent it from one connection, I can see it perfectly well on the other connection. And again, if any of you wanted to, you could add your own messages to this. So any questions about how this Ajax works? The fact that we have two different computers running here, the JavaScript on my computer, on the server, on the client's computer, could be on your computer, the Python on the server. Just to point out, what the heck? I can change back arrow. If I wanted, just to point out, it doesn't have to be this slow. I'm actually intentionally sabotaging it. If I now restart it, what's going to happen? You'll see that I don't have to have that pause there. I was just doing that for effect. So, any questions about how Ajax works, about how this chat, not that you're responsible for the chat server, it's not the most amazing of things, but it's a good example of just how Ajax can work on this client side, on the server side. Okay, since there don't seem to be any questions, I think we can end this for today. So on Friday, we're going to be doing some more with Ajax. We're going to look at another type of Ajax server. We're actually going to look at what happens if we have multiple pieces of data we might want to send. So we're going to look at some other interesting things. If you think of any questions, you can feel free to email me, post them in Piazza. Actually, more post them in Piazza than email me. But I will make sure to try to answer it on Friday. Otherwise, thank you very much. Hopefully you stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you all later. Bye.